Well, thank you very much for that very kind introduction, and I'm pleased to join with the Secretary and so many others here in welcoming you to the State Department. For me, it's great to be back, too. This is, as you heard, my second time around in the State Department, and I'm very pleased to be back with so many good colleagues who serve the country so well in challenging times in the past and now working with us to chart a more hopeful and promising future as we go forward. And it is important opportunity to have you all here, as I think you've seen, and I'll say in a few moments, the President and the Secretary have made clear the central role that they believe that the Americas plays as part of our own strategy going forward and how much our fates are intertwined. And so it is great to have you be part of this, and I'll have a few words to say, then I'll look forward to your questions and thoughts in response. It's a particularly good opportunity in light of the recent events and the recent visits and meetings to have a chance to reflect on our policy towards the Americas and to be at the conference of the Council of Americas, you all have worked so hard to build prosperity and hope for 4 decades in this hemisphere. And I'd like to begin my talk today not just discussing the administration's vision for Latin America, the broad outlines of which the President set forth at the Summit of the Americas last month, but also reflecting a little bit on how we got here. After all, just a few months ago, I was a professor and not a diplomat, and so I just can't resist a little bit of historical reflection. U.S. engagement in the Western Hemisphere has traveled a long distance since the days of the Monroe Doctrine. We've seen some valuable efforts to build better partnership in this hemisphere, from FDR's Good Neighbor policy to President Kennedy's Alliance for Progress and President Clinton's initiation of the Summit of Americas. But at other times, we have not always lived up to the basic principles of cooperation and respect. But we have learned a few things along the way. We've learned that liberalizing trade, opening markets, and reforming and balancing budgets are critical components to promoting prosperity and opportunity. But by themselves, they're not sufficient to pull people out of poverty, improve their quality of life, and build an inclusive, just society. On the democracy front, we've seen that elections are part, but only part of building democratic institutions and accountable governments. We also need to put in more time and resources to build the elements of democratic governance, effective and accountable institutions, rule of law, independent judiciaries, and respect for human rights. Today, we understand that these disparate pieces must be part of a bigger but simpler narrative that recognizes democracy is the best system available to express and channel the popular will, protect minority rights, hold leaders accountable, and ensure government delivers essential goods and services not provided by the marketplace. And likewise, we understand that GDP numbers and economic growth alone are not enough. We need a broad-based prosperity that provides opportunities for all. We need both a bigger pie and slices for everyone. Informed by this understanding of our past experience, President Obama and Secretary Clinton are setting out to build a new approach of broad hemispheric cooperation designed to benefit all of our citizens in North, Central, and South America and the Caribbean, from the more developed to the most hard-pressed. This path rests on 2 core pillars: democratic governance on the one hand, and inclusive prosperity on the other. These are the 2 essential components of what the ancient Greeks called the good life, and what the United States founders had in mind when they committed our nation to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As we look at the Western Hemisphere today, we see a landscape transformed from the past, but one that has still not achieved its full potential. For more and more people, democratically elected governments are promoting economic growth, developing institutions, and strengthening human capital to expand opportunity and social justice. Yet even with these signs of important progress, we know that many of the old challenges remain and that new ones are arising. New economic stresses are testing the region's commitments to markets and genuine democracy. For the last decade, growth has been uneven. High crime, poverty, and income inequality rates remind us that too many people have not realized the benefits of free elections, open trade, and responsible economic policies. And the transnational nature of many of the dangers our societies face, cartels, pandemic disease, environmental degradation, remind us that governing requires agile partnerships across civil society and across national boundaries. Meeting these challenges requires enhanced engagement and renewed partnership. We in the United States have a special responsibility to exercise respectful leadership that can help our hemisphere serve as a beacon to the rest of the world. The President's first visit abroad was to Canada, and not too long after that, to Mexico. He attended the Summit of the Americas in Trinidad with all of our Democratic counterparts in the region, and has hosted President Lula here in Washington. Vice President Biden traveled to the region in March to attend the Progressive Governance Summit in Chile and meet with Central American leaders in Costa Rica. Secretary Clinton has discussed our vision for this hemisphere on her visits to Mexico, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. As President Obama and Secretary Clinton have both made clear, our partnership requires a genuine willingness to listen and learn from our neighbors. We recognize that we don't have the answer to every problem, and past approaches and formulas have not always worked, and that not every good answer comes with a stamp labeled "Made in the USA." Thus, we will look across our borders to seek ideas and best practices wherever we can find them. So, for example, as we look for new and innovative ways to promote equitable growth and shared prosperity, we do well to look around our hemisphere for inspiration. Conditional cash transfer programs, such as the Bolsa Familia in Brazil and Mexico's Oportunidades program, provide families with much-needed assistance while at the same time requiring personal accountability by keeping children in school and taking them in for regular checkups. These two programs have reached 16 million families and shown dramatic results. Oportunidades has increased the likelihood of secondary enrollment in rural areas while cutting the dropout rate for students. We are discussing ways to build a network of government officials, international financial institutions, and NGOs to share the lessons of these programs. Expanded engagement will help us advance our overarching goals in the Western Hemisphere, particularly democratic governance. The hemisphere's hard-won evolution from authoritarian regimes to democratically elected governments is one of the great stories of the last quarter century. Today, democracy, though imperfect, is the norm. Recognizing the weight of this transformation, President Clinton in 1994 launched the Summit of the Americas, inviting the democratically elected leaders of this hemisphere to come together to discuss issues of common interest. His efforts and those of his predecessors were crystallized in the Inter-American Democratic Charter, which the hemisphere's 33 other democracies signed on September 11, 2001 in Lima, Peru, a sometimes forgotten bright spot in that very dark day in our history, but the best antidote to the fear and hatred that that darkness brought. This instrument's bedrock values of liberty, equality, and human rights are what we aspire to and what we all seek to advance. We must recognize that each of our countries has pursued its own democratic journey. Next month in El Salvador, for example, we will see the peaceful democratic transfer of power between representatives of opposing sides in a terrible civil war that tore the country asunder a decade ago. But however our individual trajectories might unfold, we cannot turn our back on the Charter and our shared vision of a robust democratic order. That is why we look forward to the day when every country in the hemisphere, including Cuba, can take its seat at this very special table in a manner that is consistent with the principles of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. The United States seeks a new beginning with Cuba, and we have changed our policy in ways that we believe will advance liberty and create opportunity for the Cuban people. We now allow Cuban Americans to visit the island more freely and provide resources to their families there. The President has also made clear our willingness and our readiness to engage constructively with the Cuban government on a wide range of issues. But as the United States reaches out to the Cuban people, we must also call on our friends in the hemisphere to join together in supporting liberty, equality, and human rights for all Cubans. No one should mistake our willingness to engage governments with whom our relations have deteriorated in recent years for an abdication of principle. On the contrary, we believe that engagement strengthens our abilities to raise concerns about democracy and human rights as we look for ways to cooperate in areas of common interest. One of the biggest challenges facing democracies everywhere is demonstrating to our citizens that democracy produces shared prosperity for all its hardworking people. The region is showing that democracy can deliver if governments can find ways to go beyond trade and capital liberalization, to craft policies and build institutions committed to social justice. But the current global economic downturn threatens to erode these gains. So our first priority must be to get our economic house in order. President Obama has taken unprecedented steps to address the economic crisis by correcting deficiencies in our banking and regulatory systems and enacting a stimulus package that will produce jobs and get America and the Americas on track to economic recovery. We also joined with our G20 partners to set aside over $1 trillion for countries going through difficult times, particularly those that are most vulnerable. We will work with our partners to ensure that the Inter-American Development Bank can take the necessary steps to increase its current levels of lending, and we will study the needs for recapitalization in the future. As we take these steps, we must work together to ensure that the poorest among us do not fall further behind. The impact of the economic crisis has hit hardest those at the bottom rung of the ladder of every society. Without action, what was already an unacceptable gap between rich and poor in Latin America could widen